The Solar System Ambassador Program is part of NASA's education and public outreach. One of the brilliant things is that we're all volunteers. This is something that we do out of, the generosity of our hearts. You do not pay any money in tax dollars. I certainly don't get paid for this. And you're never going to be able to get the proverbial astronaut for your kid's birthday party. This is one of the things that in many ways we're the first official contact or interaction of NASA with the community. And so we take our job seriously. There's about 900 of us walking around. We walk amongst you. And we might even be going out with your daughters. The important thing is, this is a free resource. And on my card, there's the address of the Solar System Ambassador site. Contact me. There's a directory there. You can contact me through them. And if you have a community group or an organization that's interested in some sort of talk, give me a ping, and we'll make certain we put something together. I do a couple of these a month, so it's just a matter of scheduling. And so, with all that, a couple of years ago, we had a nice little talk about a new paradigm shift in spaceflight. Traditionally, all we had been doing is your tax dollars and mine, going, having the government buy rockets, build satellites, et cetera, et cetera. That has changed. Now, regular commercial companies, aerospace companies, are the ones building satellites, and they're going out and going to the companies that do this, buying rockets and launching their communication satellites and all the rest. This paradigm has been changed even more. When we think of NASA, we think of, the Apollo missions or the Space Shuttle, again, your tax dollars at work. Well, NASA wants to get out of that business to a point. The point is, should we be sitting there spending our good tax dollars? Yes, we're going to be spending money on this, but now the industry has matured really, really well. This isn't 60 years ago when we're going, what's a spacecraft? We know how to do this. A half a dozen companies are out there building $500 million satellites. We know how to do this. So, the paradigm shift was that, does NASA have to design and build everything when there's smart people out there? And an experiment was started. It started about 8 years ago. These guys know how to do it. Of course, commercial industry can be far more efficient than government, right? Thank you. Okay, you can see where this is kind of going. Well, NASA needs rides to the International Space Station. Space Shuttle stopped flying 9 years ago. We have not had any way to put American astronauts on American rockets from American soil in all that time. And that's a phrase that I know the administrator bangs into the ground every moment he can, but it's all very true. The only access for the entire world to send people up to the space station is to go to Russia, spend $80 million on a seat, work with them in their way of doing things, and they will take you up there. It's a hugely reliable rocket, certainly the most reliable rocket and spacecraft ever made, hands down. You can say whatever you want about the Russians, they're good at this. They really, really are. And except for a year and a half ago, when one had a problem, they've effectively had 0 failures. But if they had a bigger problem, can you have a stand down where nobody's going? We'd have to get all our crews off and let the space station just float around by itself. This is a non-trivial thing. So, what are the things about spaceflight? Once it's up there, it's tough to repair. And so you want to have redundancy. More importantly, you want to have redundancy where there's no common point of failure. Dissimilar redundancy. If A doesn't work, Let's try B, which was done completely differently. Maybe we can salvage something. And so we have created a world where, addressing all those issues, we just want a taxi ride to the space station. We're not interested, as this experiment is proving pretty well, we're not interested in developing our own spacecraft. We just need a ride, just like the Russians. We just need a ride up there. More importantly, we want to have at least 2 companies do this. Dissimilar redundancy. If it turns out there's a catastrophic failure with one, we always have plan B. And so we have, as a result of all this, something called the Commercial Crew program out of NASA. We spent a lot of our tax dollars on this. Arguably, it was a heck of a lot cheaper than if NASA ran the entire show. And so let's go into some of the things that we've been doing. We have 2 new spacecraft. This is an old picture, so it looks more mock-up than anything else. 2 companies, Boeing and SpaceX. And we did not spend our time dictating what it'll look like, how it'll work, what systems should do whatever. It's like you're big boys, you're smart, you know how to do this yourself. Give us your best shot. We will pay whatever you say is a reasonable cost. But unlike most government development programs, we're not going to pay a cent more. This is a taxi ride. We will give you seed money. If you have problems, it's all on you. So, we have all this. It's just a transportation. We're just setting requirements, not the design. And we all know that for all the engineers, if you're given a set of requirements, spread them to half a dozen people, you're going to get half a dozen perfectly good solutions. None of them look the same. Totally fine. That's what the world is supposed to be like. Big, big thing. We all here in government, aerospace, military, NASA contracting, and there's horribly bad examples of this. Contracts are written so that we understand you don't know how to go bleeding edge in technology. We understand that. So here's the contract. We work out as best we could with the idea that if there are tremendous problems, and there will be, God knows certain programs were terrible, the moon program in particular, we will cover that cost. But now the world's different. Now we have people who supposedly know what they're doing. You sign what's called a fixed price contract. We will pay this much. If you're having problems, it's on your dime. And yeah, they had some problems. We'll talk about all that. But yeah, this is a different type of contracting. If it turns out they can do it for a fraction of the cost, it is a government contract. When was the last time? It expands to fill the budget, right? The important thing is you get to keep that money. That wasn't what happened, but that was the principle. Totally fun. And, well, finally, it looks like we're going to be flying this year. Trip to the space station on a Soyuz is $82 million. When we first started doing exchanges with the Russians, it was only $20 million. Then we stopped flying the shuttle. Russians aren't dummies. They knew, right? They're as capitalist as we are some ways. All of a sudden, it starts quickly going up, and now it's 4 times as much. They're not dummies. They know exactly how they have it. So, remember that part about commercial industry can do things far better than government? Can we hear a chorus of chuckles? No, it can't. Traditional old space company. Been around since, well, right around the First War. Boeing, 2 years late. But isn't it great we have this upstart SpaceX and they already have spacecraft flying that are kind of similar? They're going to just blow the doors off of everyone. Now they're 3 years late. 2.5 years. This is not easy. So, when we did a talk, and it was just a tiny part of the talk, we talked about some of the highlights that we were all excited about. One of them was that, yes, we're actually cutting metal. All those things you hear about, oh, NASA's planning this, or SpaceX wants to do that. Yeah, those are all paper studies. Those all sound real good. It looks great in Popular Mechanics or whatever rag that you read for your science news. You know it's a real thing when they start cutting metal. And for the last several years, they've been cutting it. This is actually a couple years old. This is the pressure shell for the Starliner. SpaceX was off to a great start years ago. They did a critical test. And it was kind of sobering because they had a scenario where you'd need to do it. Their rocket blew up on the pad even before it was even ready to launch. You got to get away. Yeah, you could say it's hundreds of millions of dollars or however much it costs, but of course, what's far more valuable is the precious human cargo inside. And you got to have an escape mechanism. This one had problems. They kind of downplay. SpaceX and the Boeing are always downplaying a lot of stuff. But it worked pretty well. And yeah, they were building up their spacecraft. And it looks like a good one. It really, really does. So, we had, after all this development, after all these trials and tribulations, after all this, we've actually made huge progress this year. SpaceX actually flew a very good mission up to the space station early last year. That was great. That was absolutely amazing. Now, SpaceX loves to reuse things, right? Yeah, we all know about their rockets landing and all the rest. Great stuff. Well, they were figuring, why should we build another spacecraft just for this next abort test where they have to get away from the rocket? We already have one. We can refurbish it. We can make it perfectly new, and it's just for this one test. It'll only be around for 10, 15 minutes. This is it. Well, we'll go into this a bit more. They were doing testing, and it blew up badly. This was not good. Boeing was able to do what's called a pad abort test. Again, getting off the rocket while it's still on the ground. Absolutely critical. And it flew its first mission. This did not go well. But honestly, it went more better than not. And finally, the other regime about getting away from a bad rocket, while it's at the highest point, while it's at the one point where all the forces on the rocket are the most extreme, it's the most difficult regime in flight, had to test that. And it went pretty well. We'll talk about all these. So, again, this is hard. Why did all this stuff take so long? Well, it's because nobody's ever built these particular spacecraft before. You're doing serial number 1. And we all know how perfect we build our very first things, right? Nod your heads. But SpaceX discovered an interesting, terrifying problem. We've been using parachutes for what? Since the first war? 100 years, round numbers? You think we know how to do it pretty well? Right? You'd think. All those crazies that jump out of perfectly good airplanes think that, yeah, this is going to work, right? It turns out during their testing, they found that all the models that they were using to simulate this were wrong. Decades of experience was all wrong. They had parachute shredding, not even deploying. This was bad news, especially when that parachute is the thing that's going to get you down. You want them to work. It's just like jumping out of perfectly good airplanes. Yeah. So, they had to go back and redesign. Part of the contract is if you learn new problems, you share it. This is one of the key things. And NASA went, oh my God. SpaceX went, oh my God. Everyone went, oh my God. And they now have developed newer, stronger. Turns out the forces on the shroud lines, on the risers, were far more than anyone ever expected. Only now did we have the instrumentation to actually measure it, and it was like, oh my God, this is off the scale. The other thing is, and we'll talk a little bit about it, is that their abort system, one that we saw taking the spacecraft off the top, well, there was a leak. And let's just say it was a bad day. Boeing is not immune to interesting, I didn't think that would be a problem, kind of problems. They launched, it was a magnificent launch on the most reliable rocket America's ever built. Got into orbit, sort of perfectly fine. And then we had what's called a timer issue. If I look at my watch and it's 2:26, okay. Well, their clock was 11 hours off. This is not good. There is lots of speculation that's under investigation, how that can happen. Some of the speculation seems reasonable. It was, I will bet you, an interface or a documentation issue. Anyway, they also had problems, and we'll see this, parachutes. You'd think we'd know how to do this, but no. They had a, we're going to be polite on this, misrigging, as they say. Oops. And they had a leaky abort system that they had to redesign. All this stuff probably cost them, these companies, a year and change. It's hard. It's not easy. It really is, whatever. New spacesuits we get. The old spacesuits were big and bulky and all the rest. I mean, even the ones for the shuttle, which were just magnificent. They weigh a ton, they're not comfortable, and all the rest. So, Boeing came up with one. David Clark is probably the preeminent manufacturer of that in international latex. Yes, the Playtex people that make bras. Absolutely one of the best spacesuit companies on the planet. They're the ones who, built the suits to walk on the moon. Well, you figure you want something reasonably that fits your body well. People making bras are reasonably good at that. And then you have SpaceX, which looks like it comes out of not a bad sci-fi movie. That looks cool. Damn, I wish I was wearing something like that. Talk about slimming. I walk into a room with something like that, yeah. I think what they went and did was they went to, what's the store? Forever 21 or something, where they have like 80-pound waifs, the models and all the rest. The reality is, it's not so flattering. Yeah, these guys, they're men of it, well, they're 40s and all the rest, and they're not 80-pound waifs anymore. So yeah, it's not nearly as flattering, but we can get around that. Anyway, so let's talk about the spacecraft. Boeing's looks a lot like the old Apollo. Same basic shape. Obviously hugely more optimized because technology has moved on. After 50 years, we don't have the huge racks of electronics and all the rest. Yes, there's stuff that's very specific to it. But now we have 4 people, option for 7 in a pinch. It'll send up all kinds of cargo as well, a few hundred pounds. Not thousands of pounds like they regularly send up, but if you need to bring up a few extra goodies or a new hard drive or something, poof, works great for that. They have what's called a service module, section after this capsule itself. That contains your propulsion, your life support, all the things you need that you don't have to have on your way down under your parachutes. Everything is completely officially automated. Now, we all know that astronauts don't like to be passengers. More importantly, as we find out, what happens if something breaks? Now, I know all the code I ever wrote never had a bug, right? Right, anyone who's in IT, never, God, we're good, right? Everything can be overridden. And that's one of the key things. Yeah, it's great to just sit back, but geez, when even your toaster can give you a problem anymore. Internet of Things. Why do I need my toaster connected to the internet? Won't go there. The one amazing thing, amazing especially for a company like Boeing, we're not splashing down the ocean anymore with them. Excuse me. We're landing in the desert, white sands in New Mexico. And because it's not splashing around in water, they're already planning to only build a couple of these spacecraft and just keep reusing them. Dust them off, poof, put them on another rocket, away you go. Oh, there's some cosmetic stuff. Just because it's cosmetic, it'll buff out, and it does. But honestly, that's how this is the whole idea. Now we've gotten to the point where we can be good enough that we can reuse this stuff. We don't have to build the same thing over and over and over again, keep a production line. They're pretty much done building all the spacecraft they'll ever use. Cross your fingers. Anyway, so this is it. This is Starliner, the gray conical kind of thing. It's amazing all the technology that they reused. Heat shield is pretty much a traditional ablative heat shield, but little black squares, those are all from the Space Shuttle. All that Space Shuttle technology. All the gray is also Space Shuttle blankets. Not pulled off the shuttles, but, they're all freshly, newly built. But Boeing built the shuttle. They know how to build these things, and it works great. Low risk. Low risk. That section below it, that's all kind of dotted. I forget why the dots are there. That's where all your propulsion and your, most of your life support, cooling, a lot of avionics are all in there. You have a little aerodynamic skirt, and the rest is the rocket. Well, my expertise is in Apollo and how to land on the moon. And if you go into those cockpits, it's just visually overwhelming. Huge instrument panels, nothing but switches, gauges, breakers, the whole smash. The panel, and we'll see in the next slide, isn't very big. Everything is a screen. Software is pretty much taken from the Boeing 787. Or at least that's what they use as a starting thing. We know how to build that software. Sometimes it works. Great ideas. I know where you're going. No, we're not going to go there. Anyway, that's pretty much the entire panel. Not much there. You don't even have a view out the front. Everything is by TV cameras. Very, very clever. Very minimal number of switches, just enough to override anything you need to in case automation fails. Works pretty well. Now we're going to look at Crew Dragon. Again, give me a problem, half dozen people, we're going to get half a dozen good, smart folk coming up with different ideas. This all has the same ideas, or has the same requirements as the Starliner. Up to 4 people, plus cargo. Again, only a few hundred pounds, but sometimes that's all you need. Different approach. I don't know, has anyone ever been in a Tesla Model 3? I spent 2 weeks driving around with a friend in one. It's spooky. No instrument panel. Just a big touch screen. Creepy amazing. SpaceX has done the same. Just a touch screen panel. Very few switches. One of them just says abort if you need it. That's it. Amazing stuff. Also, and amazing for SpaceX. You can't reuse this thing. It's going to land in the ocean, which is a very un-SpaceX thing to do. And it won't be reused. There's talk of it being refurbished for a cargo mission. That may or may not happen, don't know. But very un-SpaceX. And there we have it. The capsule is that kind of bullet-shaped thing on the top. They have what's called a trunk, which is an interesting configuration. The black is actually your solar panel. On the other side, and that's half of it. On the other side, you have radiators to radiate all the waste heat. Very important in spaceflight. A different solution works really well. Cockpit, again, very few buttons. Just a little row of them at the very, very bottom. And it's all touchscreen. The guys who are in the chunkier spacesuits have special gloves that allow you to touch, and it's conductive and all the rest. Works pretty well. And it's all pretty pictures. No windows looking forward. You have a TV screen. Very, very neat. Also, again, going in style. I'm looking for a new recliner. I would not mind having one of those. If anyone knows a cheap recliner, I got to get rid of the one I have in the living room. If you can make one look like that, I can do this. I mean, we won't need all the 5-point harnesses. I don't do that much exciting stuff in my recliner. Anyway, so we started out the year. I think it was back in March, something like that. Sent a mission up to the space station. It worked like a champ. It really did. Delivered cargo. It got down the water. All those things that people were sweating about, they all went, whew. It worked. Good for them. Absolutely fabulous for them. Worked like a champ. And, which is now starting to turn into a little bit of a fun tradition, the Russians, when you go up on a Soyuz, and I think it was done halfway as a joke, but you will see in the videos when they're launching, there's a little plush little toy hanging from a string from the instrument panel. And you see this thing just, stretched out and vibrating during launch. And it was kind of like a trinket, a good luck charm or something. They refer to it as a 0G indicator. Because when the engine shut off, it starts floating around, as if you don't know already that you're in orbit. Oh, whatever. Well, now we're loading up all kinds of other fun things in spacecraft to indicate zero gravity. It's a technical term. And you can get that little plushy thing. In fact, well, you might not be able to because they've been sold out for the longest time, but that's the little 0G indicator. That's Anne McClain, and arguably she might be the first woman on the moon. And just to record all the forces on the astronauts, lately they've been putting up mannequins, all instrumented just like crash test dummies, to see if the vibrations and the accelerations and all the rest are within the limits that they're planning. Very, very cool. And then they had their bad day. Okay, well, SpaceX loves to reuse things. Why build two when you're not being paid for it? You can just reuse what you got. And so they bring the spacecraft back. They put it up on a test stand. SpaceX is fabulous for testing. All right, let's just give it a work through. It's worked hundreds of times before. Just want to make certain we're okay. And, well, it went boom. It turned out, and while we're talking, it turned out they found out one interesting thing. And this is someone recording it off of a monitor, so it's horribly low resolution, but they were ready to fire the engines. Ready to fire the engines. And boom. Lots of little pieces. There's a phrase in spaceflight about a big effing orange cloud, which usually means your oxidizer is leaking. Delightfully toxic. If you want to do chemical warfare, use nitrogen tetroxide. It's a miserable, horrible chemical. And from miles away, you can see this big orange cloud coming up when that blew. Bad day. Turns out, whoops, a real bad day. Come on. It turns out it was traced to a leaky valve. That valve allowed, maybe handful size, bit of oxidizer to leak up into the pressurization system. When you open the valves to pressurize, now you have the ultimate water hammer. And it blew up the high pressure tanks. It blew up the fuel tanks. Big red-orange cloud. Bad news. And so they fixed it. They did. It's a perfectly great solution. Maybe they should have had it ahead of time. In one of the press conferences, they said, we did not know the mechanisms of extraordinarily high pressure and high velocity fluids moving. All that has now been shared. Bad day. Cost them about 8 months. Now we get back to Boeing. They had to do their test to see if we can get off a launch pad on a bad day. It went real well, except for one thing. Yeah, this is, here it is on its stand. It has rocket engines on the bottom. Push it up. And again, some days are better than others. So here's the test. Again, parachutes. Remember parachutes? Always a bit hard. Has 3 of them for redundancy. Always want to have 3 parachutes. And here it is going off. Big red cloud because you dribble out some of this stuff. And it starts getting up. Now we're about 1.5 miles from the rocket that could have been blowing up. Great stuff. It turns around. And we get rid of the top part. We fire off some drogues. Just beautiful work. Let's pull out the main chutes. All 3 of them. I only see 2. Oops. Bad. Oops. Everything else works, it's one of those things that no matter how perfect everything else works, if you don't get it all right, you never remember the good stuff. But this actually went very well. It turned out the rigging of it, one of the small parachutes, a pilot chute. Oh, and they drop. Oh, this is the other brilliant thing. They drop the heat shield off. Now we fill up airbags. Just not like what's in your car, but close enough. And this allows a reasonably soft touchdown on land. And it actually worked really well. Of course, only thing anyone remembers is that they didn't forget the connection wasn't done properly. And yeah, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, I know, but.
Would the passengers have made it?
Oh yeah, very much so. Very much so. And, in corporate spin speak, this was a successful test. All right, fine. We'll give it to them. We will give it to them. Yeah. Okay, so now, this was the big thing that they wanted to make certain everything went well. And honestly, we forget all the good stuff that happened, which worked perfectly. Now we get a chance to go into orbit. Now we're going to do the same thing SpaceX did, again, back in March, April, something like that. And we used a brand new Atlas configuration. The Atlas is the rocket that they go on. This was something that has never been done. It has no nose cones, just a spacecraft on top. That's maybe not the worst thing. They added an extra engine to the second stage. That hadn't flown in 20 years. They know how to do it, just hadn't needed to be done. We're going to go up there for a few days, and everyone's going to get their Christmas presents. Yippee-i-yo. Cool. Get up to the space station. I mean, this is going to be a good one. And honestly, all right, the parachute thing was an embarrassment. Well, things had problems. The clock on the spacecraft. Now we go, oh, well, that sounds pretty low tech, just using it. Turns out just about every spacecraft has to have a timer. It really does. And it turned out, and there's lots of great speculation, some of it sounds pretty plausible, about why it was 11 hours off. Problem was, guidance system thinks it's 11 hours off. I'm sorry, the guidance system thinks it's 11 hours off. It goes, oh, well, I need to get in, one part of it's going, I need to fire the engines to finish my orbit insertion. The other is going, oh, if you're going to do that, you need to be pointing here, and the communications satellites that you relay your data through are over here, and my speculation is left and right hand weren't talking with one another. They had a huge amount of maneuvering, burned up a tremendous amount of fuel in the confusion. Ground controllers go, oops, this is the problem. They shut everything down. They saved it, but by then it was too late. They had burned up too much fuel, and they weren't in the right position to do a rendezvous at the space station, so they cut it to 2 days. All because of a timer issue. But when you think of it, What else, if it's completely automated, what other mechanisms would you use? Timers have been working great in spacecraft for, 50 years, mostly great. We'll talk offline about what the speculation is. And anyway, so this is what it was like inside the spacecraft. I got a neat little video of it. And instead of that little Earth plushie, the mascot of NASA for 50-something years has been Snoopy. And so there's Snoopy in his couch on a little leash so he doesn't float away too much. And they had their mannequin, Rosie the Rocketeer. Gotta love that. Whoops. And even though they had their troubles, everything else worked brilliantly. Came down, White Sands missile range, landed right on the runway. Perfect bullseye. You can't beat that. I mean, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And you can see the airbags that inflate on the bottom. And you're going, oh, geez, are they trying, like if there's an airplane crash and they want to paint over the name of the airline, they're putting a cover over it. And the problem, and the thing is with that, and we found this out with the third Space Shuttle landing, White Sands isn't like a dry lake bed. It's all a gypsum desert. And gypsum, huge, incredibly fine powder, gets into everything. By the end of the shuttle program, by the time Columbia was lost, they were still finding gypsum in the systems. That was 25 years later. So the idea is you just put a little protective thing around it, keeps the dust out because we're going to be reusing this and we don't want to go through all the hassles. Anyway, just real quick, and this is the last video. Want to know what it looks like out the window? That's launching. And this is from Starliner. And you're going, well, gee, isn't that supposed to be horribly violent launches? That's about as shake, rattle, and roll as you get. Snoopy looking pretty relaxed. We start throwing off stuff that we don't have to have. Yeah, this is the most vibration you're going to get. And you can see that, yeah, you're rattling a bit. The Atlas is a surprisingly smooth rocket to ride. I'm sorry, this is the Max. And yeah, you're shaking a bit, but I've gone over worse roads in Pennsylvania, so. We get rid of the top cover that we don't need. Shut off, and it's like, ooh, now we're done. And we're on our way. Stunning views. Again, the amount of Windex you have to use because everyone's nose is messing up the windows as they look outside. But you can see with all the engines firing, it's now, I don't want to say it was out of control, but it wasn't completely in control. And you can see Snoopy on his leash just being bounced around. Obviously, it's not terribly violent. It is fully expected that, if there was a crew on board, they go, oops, no, stop. Manual override. We will be fine. Da-da-da-da-da. Now we're just hanging out. Rosie the Rocketeer is doing just swell. And then then it's time to go, oh yeah, great shot. Moonrise, there's the moon coming by. This is coming home. This is what it looks like when you go through the atmosphere the wrong way. We're on the way home. And you could see, even though it's a dynamic phase, it's not a violent thrash around kind of thing. The view outside is interesting, I'll give you that. Now we get rid of the cover covering all the parachutes. And this is all slow motion, but parachutes come out. We had to launch and land at night just for the proper phasing to get to the space station. You're really dependent on that. Main parachutes come out. And yeah, it's a bump, but it's not horrible. This is something that, yeah, if you have a bad back, it might not be good for it, but. So, real quick, and we're just about done here. Come on. Oh yeah, the in-flight abort test. Now, SpaceX said, we got extra rockets, they don't cost us much. We're going to test one of these things to see if we can get off a launch pad. Most dynamic part, about 1.5 minutes into the launch, pressures on the vehicle are the highest. The drag is the highest. So any kind of escape has to overcome that. Very important. And this is a great shot. I wish I had videos, but there was enough cloud cover. You really don't see that much. The long-range cameras weren't, we're trying to look through cloud and all the rest. So one of the chase planes was able to follow it, got this amazing shot, and you can see the abort engines firing on the top. The engines on the rocket are still firing. So you have to overcome the thrust of the rocket, plus all that atmospheric drag and force on the spacecraft to get yourself away. It worked like a champ. It honestly did. SpaceX did well. What do you think happens to the rocket? SpaceX is great at recovering rockets, right? Well, they're very good about recovering intact rockets. It went boom, as expected. There's no control on it. You're still in reasonably thick atmosphere. It starts tilting, pitching away. Aerodynamically, it breaks up. Spacecraft goes up. That trunk, that part in the back, great shot of it separating. Came down in all of its parachutes. Everything went fine. So, we're right on time. Yeah. That.
With the trunk, there was stuff, would have been, if it was a real mission, there would have been cargo and stuff in the trunk?
It could have been, yes. It could have been. In this case, obviously, they're not going to put anything in there. You could argue, is it a valid test if there isn't a mass simulator, something that, okay, if we're going away and we have 2 tons of stuff in there, that's a fair argument. That's a fair argument. Anyway, the real bragging thing. Okay, companies like to make money. That's cool. The real thing is the last Space Shuttle mission back in 2011 left a little present. And we're going to, first one up to the space station with the crew gets to capture the flag. And that is more, those bragging rights are more important than, I'm being silly, but are more important than getting paid for fancy contracts and all the rest. Someone's office is going to be, well, very happy to get that. So anyway, that's it. Sir.
So, you're talking about having both of those disparate launching systems. Are they going to start, if let's say one of them finishes early, are they going to wait to make sure both of them are functioning before they start using it for people to go up?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to completely mention this. Sorry. And this answers your question. Okay, all the major tests are done. There is an interesting review going on. SpaceX had their spacecraft blow up on them, and so they just picked the next one off the list to do that pad abort that we saw. The next one down the line is designed to stay up not for a week or two, but for 6-8 months on the space station. Boeing has always designed their spacecraft for a 6-8 month mission, not just a week or two. We're running out of seats we buy from the Russians. We have one left. Question, and this I think is the point of your question. The next mission's more than likely, SpaceX certainly, Boeing maybe, that's in review right now because of the problems they had. The next launches likely will have crew on them.
You said crew.
Crew. Flesh and blood. Now, what is under further review, we're just about out of rides we can get from the Russians. Do we want to make a regular crew exchange rather than just a visit with these new spacecraft? Ooh, good question. And so, SpaceX is almost certainly going to go first, unless plans change, and there's lots of internet rabble about this, But if they're going to be spending 6 months on the space station, they need to really get trained on space station systems. Right now, they haven't been. It's just basically, where do I go to the bathroom kind of stuff. And I'm being facetious with that. If they're going to be a regular productive part of another expedition up there, they really have to get up to speed on space station things. Boeing, for the last several months, has always been ready. The question becomes, are they going to do it as well? This now is really what's driving the schedule. Again, SpaceX, they'd probably be ready to fly in June, May, probably. Boeing, maybe the same time. But it's getting crowded up on the space station. They have lots of vehicles coming up to visit. It actually is a congestion issue. Who would have think, right? Sir?
If they launch somebody up there, one of these things for 6 months, that means it stays up there for 6 months. Can another thing come up during that, or
Oh, that's what'll happen.
There's more than one docking?
Yeah, they have 2 of them. And the idea is, we'll say SpaceX goes first. Say they launch in May, they're up for 6 months, it's November-ish. Then Boeing would launch a few weeks before, so now you have 2 of them up there. They'd start the handover, okay, here's the bathroom, here's how the experiments work. And then the first crew, ones who came up on Dragon, would go home, and the next crowd would be up there for a certain amount of time. And then we're not having to buy Russian seats anymore, which is a large part of the objective. So that is what I'm sorry, I should have put a slide up on that. But that's what the schedule looks like very, very tentatively. Sir?
So that's everything to go up to the space station. NASA, just like I think this week I looked it up, they were planning on going to the moon by 2024. How many of those components are being tested?
Okay. Whole different thing. We actually had a chat on this a couple months ago. Commercial industry, and this is a cost plus thing where we have to pay for other people's struggles, not mistakes, although there were some. We need to have a massive new rocket. Unfortunately, it's not nearly as big as the Saturn V that we went on, the first one. You'll hear it called the SLS, Space Launch System. They finished it, they rolled it out. It's now at a facility for serious testing. It's already been mounted up. It's over in what's called the Stennis Space Center in Mississippi, where they test these things. The spacecraft, the new Orion, is pretty much done. And so they're kind of ready to go, but a huge amount of testing needs to be done first. Yes, we built it. Now we have to test it and see if it can ignite itself and without blowing up. Things are looking very good. They actually work very hard at this. Now, 2024. Sorry, am I cynical, bitter? We originally had plans about going back to the moon in 2028. It actually was a reason, given the capability of the spacecraft and the vehicles and all what we've built as far as an architecture, it was hugely imperfect, but it was the best we could do. There's lots of criticisms about the architecture, but no one can really come up with a sane alternative that can be done. Now, we were planning 2028. Where does 2024 come from? Understand, NASA is not a company. NASA is part of the government. Your tax dollars go to it. When you're spending, $20 billion a year or whatever, decisions become political decisions. It was decided by someone whose name I won't mention that, 2028, Trump wins a second term, he wants to be on the moon by then. There is no chance on this green earth that will ever happen. We haven't even gotten a design, much less a contract let, for the thing to actually land on the moon. It took 7-8 years for just these little capsules to be designed. And now you want a whole new architecture of landing on the moon? I haven't even seen a technical paper on how it's going to be done. I mean, yes, they exist. And yes, proposals are being written. But to do it in 3 or 4 years, when something as simple, and I put that in quotes, as a lunar lander, which, again, it's architected very Rube Goldberg, but they're stuck with it. No. 2028, almost certainly. Sir.
Actually, the same question John just posed. Going beyond that, SpaceX is developing a single plane, basically, to, I think, go to Mars.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a capsule, it's an uncloned.
Starship.
Yeah.
Starship and super heavy. Okay, one of the things about being a solar system ambassador is that I'm here to basically talk about the NASA mission, all aspects of it. This has nothing to do with NASA, and so officially I'm not going to comment. Unofficially. Okay, I'm not on duty anymore.
You're on film now.
Pardon? Killed the tape. Get me edit, get me rewrite. Aren't science fiction dreams fun? I have been following that very, very closely. SpaceX is spending, when you look at the infrastructure that they're building, and infrastructure is not sexy, but it has to be done. They're spending huge amounts of money with the idea this works. Now, there is an argument, a fair one, a Silicon Valley argument. Run fast, fail often, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, come up with version 1.1. That works pretty great in software. Reasonably great, not real great, but it works. The only problem is when you have stuff that has 6-8 month lead times, costs tens of millions of dollars, and one little oops will blow things to smithereens. SpaceX, for some reason, it's just their bad luck, and it is bad luck or bad something, has a problem with pressurizing things. Almost everything, I'm being nasty and I shouldn't be, and I'm off the clock. They have lots of explosions. From their Dragon to a couple rockets to some other things they're testing. They don't even have a design formalized, not even artwork, of what the latest iteration is going to be. I think that their architecture will end up more looking like Space Shuttle 2.0, and they're going to have the exact same problems that the Space Shuttle has. Their biggest problem is that denial is a real thing. We'll talk much more later about the concerns I have. They are advertising and are being bankrolled by, of all things, a Japanese art collector billionaire. Can't make that up. Who wants to take all of his buddies around the moon. He also just now is advertising for a gal to go up with him. I won't go there. That's outside my whatever. Well, he's committed, and the reason why you see so much effort being done is that he has his own milestones written into the contract. They have to produce something. He's supposed to send this thing around the moon with maybe a dozen people in 3 years. It took them 7 years just to build a capsule, and they knew what it looked like ahead of time. We'll talk a lot more later. Can I go back on the clock?
I just have a very quick question.
Yeah.
Is that what the existing space station looks like? No.
That's 2001.
That is the greatest movie ever made. I have the poster at home.
Okay.
Actually, I'm shuffling things around the house.
So maybe I was missing something, but okay.
If you haven't seen 2001, you've missed a lot.
Right, okay. I have.
But yeah, no. That was the future I grew up with. That was exact. I was 12 years old when that came out. Don't do the math. That was the future, that we were all supposed to grow up in. Of course we're just going to hop on Pan Am shuttle and, well, geez, whatever happened to Pan Am? Bummer. And yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
This Space Force.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
What is the purpose of that work? What is that?
In government, when there's money involved, sometimes it's not a strict business case.
I mean, is there a goal involved in this, or is it?
In government, I am off the clock. I'm still off the clock. Okay. We have had, although it wasn't called this, for 60 years. Actually, I think it was started with Eisenhower. So we're going back almost 70 years. We have had what today would look exactly like the United States Space Force. It is the Air Force. It's a bit of the CIA, not much. And it's one of the spookiest three-letter agencies, in existence, called the National Reconnaissance Office. Its existence, forget about its $20 billion or $40 billion black, like it's not even a line item on a budget, ultra black project. All they did was just shuffled the chairs on not the Titanic, but it's the exact same thing. Oh, people get a new uniform. It's the exact same thing. We are restricted by 1967 Outer Space Treaty. You will never, ever, ever, full stop. If you don't understand never, ever, look it up. It means never, ever. You will never put nuclear weapons or any weapons in space, offensive or defensive. Full stop. Treaty level obligation, 50-something years old. Ever. Spy satellites are cool. Totally cool. National technical means. Perfectly fine. So if the idea of a Space Force conjures up Star Wars and laser cannons and planet destroyers, no. Just no. And the idea is, again, government, let's have simultaneous eye roll. It's government. It is modeled after the organizational arrangement that the Marines have with the Navy. Remember, the Marines are actually part of the Navy. This is now part of the Air Force. They shuffled all the contractors' names and all the rest. And again, amazingly, they have the same camo uniforms that the other Air Force guys. Now, I don't know about how much camouflage you need in space, but that's fine. And the greatest, most fun scandal ever, they just announced their logo.
I saw that.
You saw this. United Federation of Planets. There's lots of conservatives that wouldn't like that. But anyway, yes, ma'am.
Being that some people are really into breaking contracts and treaties, what is
I can't think of anyone.
what is the chance of that prohibition that you just mentioned actually going?
Not insignificant. However, think of this. What's the worst place to put nuclear weapons if you're thinking... no, seriously. And I mean this very seriously. What is the worst place to put nuclear weapons, offensive nuclear weapons, in case you're going to get into a shooting war, as they say?
Space, orbit.
And it's even worse to put them on the moon. It's going to take 3-4 days for you to do something about it. An orbit, if you look at the Earth, you're going in an orbit. You're only going to pass over within 1,000-ish miles of any target once or twice a day. Maybe. This isn't instantaneous, and it takes about half hour to get down from space on a good day. Maybe a little bit further. If it's up there, you know where it is. Those uber secret spy satellites I had to talk a couple years ago, guys go out with nice, but affordable, a couple $1,000s, but not millions. Home telescopes, and they take pictures of the most classified assets the United States has. There's a guy with a 10-inch Celestron, nice software, probably cost him 10 grand for his whole setup. And he, spy satellite comes over, here's a picture. Picture of the space station, no, you can't see people waving, but you can make out details. You can almost, the military, when they do them, they have a 35-inch Baker Nunn camera, I think. You can almost read the lettering on the shuttle. Everyone knows where these things are. Everyone announces, and you go on certain websites, and it tells you exactly where it's going to be. I mean, if you want to see the space station, same thing. So, you put a submarine underwater, nobody knows where it is. Okay, you know where the ICBMs are in Montana or wherever they are. But honestly, 15 minutes door to door, FedEx can't even do that. Sir?
Yeah, so was the unmanned shuttle craft that has been in orbit for about 2 years?
Oh, it just came back last month.
That they just retired a few days ago?
I'm sorry, the last thing you said, sorry?
The military.
Right.
Run by one or more military branches.
Which are not going to be named, but they have 3 letters, and yeah.
Anyway, was that in violation of our no weapons in space treaty?
That only presumes that it had weapons on board.
Which we don't know because it was...
Right. But how do we know that the latest spy satellite doesn't either? Yeah. On a practical level, Frank O'Brien's speculation, this is the X-37, it's looks like a mini shuttle, roughly the same lines, roughly. And very nicely reusable. There's 2 of them. They went up, I think, for 6 months at the beginning. Now it's like 2 years. You know what I think that they're doing? Frank O'Brien's pure speculation. Know nothing on this. What's in space that's not on the ground? Well, you have the high ground.
Asteroids.
No, it's in Earth orbit. It's not going anywhere near asteroids. It's just lower. It's 200-300 miles. And yeah, one guy in particular with his nice, Celestron is taking pictures of it. It's not having anything major hang out that's unexpected.
How about the
magnetic fields?
The oceans.
Well, okay, now we'll go into what I don't think is the case. If you're going to have a great spy satellite, you know what the Hubble is, effectively? It's a spy satellite. Instead of looking down, it's looking up. It's roughly the same optics. And as a matter of fact, one of the new telescopes probably going to be launching in a decade, called WFIRST, is going to be using optics that the NRO, the spy agencies, were planning for their next generation spy satellites. Abandon it. They still have the mirrors and all the rest. So they're just repurposing it. So, key thing is that these mirrors are big. And in order to do good photography of looking up or looking down, a big mirror is necessary. You can't just do it with a small little home telescope. It's laws of physics. The space plane that the military is flying, its cargo bay is not very big. You wouldn't be testing high-resolution optics. You might want to do some detectors or something like that. More importantly, and it was kind of spooky and it was never well done because they had lots of problems, there are manufacturing processes, especially in semiconductors, where you need ultra, beyond anything we can do on Earth, ultra high vacuum. We flew a couple shuttle missions that had what looked like a big dinner plate, about 12 feet across, that was let to go fly off, and on the lee side, not the windward side, there's still a little bit of atomic oxygen and other things which could contaminate some ultra-sensitive processes, and they were doing manufacturing. It was promising. The experiments actually failed a lot, but I think that they're actually doing materials processing or crystal growth or something like that, stuff that you wouldn't be able to get a PhD in it because it's so classified. That's my guess. 3D printing is so overrated. But that's just my thing. it has its applications, but you're not going to 3D print a laptop or anything. Anything else? Because I don't want to keep you guys any longer. Well, I can be here all day, but yeah. Great stuff. I'm glad you guys all made it. I'm glad my voice made it. I'm sorry? Yeah, spontaneous applause goes here.